Oh, okay. Did we get, oh, we got a gavel, okay.
All right,
Although we
ready?
have twice as many staff as we have attendees today, so.
Let me call this meeting of the Electoral Board to order. Thank you all very much for being here. If you would all please rise for a moment of silence and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So, we have a number of staff here and some of the usual suspects. So, well, thank you all very much for being here. First item of business is the approval of minutes. Do we have...
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 So approved. So do we have a hard copy?
Hard copy there if you want to sign.
Thanks to Marcus for doing those. So the next item of business, report from electoral board members. Madam Vice Chair, do you have anything?
I had so much fun at the first meeting, I decided to come back.
We're glad you're here.
No report, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary.
Good morning. Thank you to everybody for being here. I know that nobody in this room has to be reminded of the importance of elections. The fact that you're here on a rainy Wednesday morning would be a strong indicator that you are some of the most faithful and conscientious voters in Prince William County. So thank you for being here. Unfortunately, only about 67% of your fellow eligible voters in the county share that sentiment, at least according to the turnout from the last election. But we do hope to change that this year, and the registrar has some, I believe, pretty exciting information that he's going to share with you later today on initiatives toward that end. Facilitating the vote in Prince William County and ensuring free and fair and accurate elections is really the sole reason that this board exists, and it is the goal and the daily endeavor for the general registrar and the excellent staff of the election office. They work very hard to ensure that. Elections matter. Elections have consequences, and therefore voting matters. And voting, and really more importantly, the lack of voting, not more importantly, but just as important, the lack of voting has consequences. I'd argue that the same can be said for the broader engagement and participation in the broader process, to include being an election officer and even volunteering. President Calvin Coolidge talked about that in a radio address back in 1924, a long time ago, but it still applies. And he had this to say. He said, "All of the opportunity for self-government through the rule of the people depends upon one single factor, and that is the ballot box. The people of our country are sovereign, and if they do not vote, they abdicate that sovereignty. And they may be entirely sure that if they relinquish it, other forces will seize it. And if they fail to govern themselves, some other power will rise up to govern them. The choice is always before them whether they will be free or whether they will be slaves. The only way to be free is to exercise actively and energetically the privileges and discharge faithfully the duties which make freedom. It is not to be secured by passive resistance. It is the result of energy and action. Persons who have the right to vote are trustees for the benefit of their country and their countrymen. They must remember that their country and their countrymen cannot get along, cannot remain sound, cannot preserve its institutions, cannot protect its citizens, cannot maintain its place in the world unless those who have the right to vote do sustain and do guide the course of public affairs by the thoughtful exercise of that right on Election Day. So we just came through an election this past November in which the voices of the citizens of America and of the Commonwealth of Virginia were heard and their will was implemented. We have another opportunity in just a few months. Primaries are scheduled for June of this year. The outcome of the last election, whether you were pleased by it or upset by it, should motivate all of us to stay engaged and redouble our efforts in the coming election season. And I look forward to working with the other members of this board, the registrar and his excellent staff, and all of you and the entire voting population of Prince William County to make sure that this year's elections are the best and cleanest and most transparent that we've ever had. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very briefly, one issue. So we have seen the president and Elon Musk fire tens of thousands of federal employees over the last several weeks. And there's one agency in particular that the election community has to be concerned about, and that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. Now, CISA is part of the Department of Homeland Security, and they have the responsibility for protecting all of our country's critical infrastructure, including the election system. As I recall, there was a time when we had to struggle to get election security under their purview. According to the Associated Press, at least 130 employees of CISA have been fired so far. We don't know how many of them were working on election security, but this raises a critical concern, particularly for those of us in states that have an election this year. This is not a next year or down the road kind of situation. Now, in addition to the firings at CISA, the new Attorney General announced that she was disbanding a task force of the FBI that had worked with state and local election offices and others to deal with foreign threats on our elections in the United States. So there's always some churn and some turnover and change when administrations change from one to another. But I think we could agree that the level of churn this year has been significantly higher than others. Now, I know that our commissioner is concerned about election security, and I know that Eric talks to her frequently, and so I just wanted to highlight this issue that if the federal government is going to step back from its role in protecting election technology and security, then that's going to require the states to step in to fill that void. And so I just want to ask Eric to, when she communicates with the commissioner, to let them know that we're all very concerned about election security. It's a 24-hour, 365 every year election year cycle for Virginia. So that's all I have. Next on the agenda is the General Registrar's report.
Okay, so here to report on a few different things today. As we've started this meeting this year with a largely new board and sort of coming out of a presidential election, those are always kind of bookends for us in the election process. You get to see really as the pressure and participation amp up in a presidential election year, especially in the general election. You see where things are that you can improve, you see where you're succeeding. So I think we're starting this year with meetings that are more broad, and I'm sure we're going to narrow down to more specific things as this year goes on in terms of policies, in terms of goals. So today is kind of, at that broader but starting to narrow a point of the cone. So for 2024 primaries, we don't really have firehouse primaries. So in years past, parties would sometimes hold their own primaries. Every once in a while, the elections office would get a primary off as those happen, but no such vacation for us, at least in the near future. And that is just because the state law now requires, if parties are going to hold their own primaries, they have to have several functions that exist when there's an official primary, the most difficult of which is doing mail ballots, which can be a complicated endeavor. So we are unlikely to see much of the firehouse primary in the near future, barring that law changing. So a few deadlines for those upcoming primaries. The filing deadline for candidates is April 3rd, so that's just around the corner. Mail ballots have to be sent at the end of April, so April is a busy month for us when we go from finalizing and knowing who the candidates are to preparing those ballots to sending them out to voters. Early voting starts at the beginning of May on Friday, May 2nd. The voter registration deadline is May 27th, and then election day is June 17th. So we're in the early stages now. I think everybody got a nice break over the last several months after a really busy election season and a year that featured 3 different elections and very high participation. So we are doing a number of sort of large things at this point, getting our memorandums of understanding for the schools and our facilities. That's usually a multi-year process, so we're going through that right now to kind of secure those agreements for this year, but also the next few years. We're finalizing our training plans for officer training. We're getting print materials ready for the mail ballots. We have to work with our vendor to make sure that the envelopes and everything that's going to go out for those materials is prepared in advance so that can be ready when we start mailing them. We're finalizing projections for staffing and equipment. That is going to be something at the next board meeting that the board will review and approve for the upcoming primary. Ballot design, as I noted, is going to take place around mid-April. And at the next board meeting, we will have a full staff task list of what tasks. We have about 325 tasks, I think, that we complete each election. Some of those take a few hours. Some of those are, take a week with multiple staff members. And we'll have an update for the board at the next meeting with where we are in all those tasks as we really start to ramp up for that upcoming election. There was a community survey that the county completed. The county does a survey every 2 or 3 years, roughly, and it asks county residents about their opinions about the services they're receiving and the opinions about things in their community. It came out in November. We were kind of busy then, so I hadn't really had a chance to look at the results until the last couple weeks. This was something we looked at, and they look at voting and they look at our office as part of that. So the voting experience is generally one of the most highly rated activities according to residents in the county. So if you look at this is the general government area. The survey is split up into different service areas, but you can see we perform very well. 94% of voters say they're satisfied with their voting experience in Prince William County. The very satisfied portion of that is really high at 67% and generally exceeds most other activities in the county. In terms of how this has done over time, they normalize the surveys they've done. Sometimes there's a slightly different methodology, slightly different question structure. So they've normalized that over a span of time. And, that's the wrong one there that's highlighted, but your voting experience in Prince William County was at 67 in 2016. It has gone up to 79 as an average score in 2024. That is well above the average score of most of these areas that they survey. So in terms of the data from the 2021 survey until now, there's 30 different areas they looked at. 12 of those went up, 18 went down. Voting was a +7 up. So on that last slide, you see we went from 72 to 79 from 21 to 2024. That +7 was the highest of any gain in any activity area. The second activity area only was a +4. So there were several activities that were +1, +2, +3, +4. Nobody gained as much as we do. So that really says a lot for the work that our staff does, and it really says a lot for our election officers and the excellent service that they give to voters, that they are very happy with that process, especially given some of the rancor in politics and some of the concerns people have about safety and election integrity. Really shows that people are having a good experience voting. So, really proud of those survey results. Here you can see across a whole bunch of different areas, you can see that elections and voter registration really among the highest satisfaction. They also really like the libraries. They really like the Parks and Recreation Department. They really appreciate a lot of the public safety organizations, the fire department, the police, all are rated very highly. And note that because they ask who they have actually had contact with when they do these surveys and see which offices citizens who respond to this are actually, in contact with. And elections is the second highest, just behind the libraries, in terms of the percentage of the individuals who had contact with our office over the time of the survey. And I thought it was worth pointing out that while the other organizations that also have a high level of contact are large budgeted agencies with hundreds of employees, elections gets this done with a fraction of the cost and a minute number of the same of full-time employees. So really a credit that not only are we scoring very highly and our trend is on the up, but we're doing this with very limited resources and generally staying within those resources. So good news from that survey. It's a really interesting read. They have, you can read all the comments that voters have as well. Everything from, elections to taxes to data centers, all the normal feedback you would get on different processes in the counties. So if you go on the county website or you just Google PWC Community Survey, you'd be able to find the full report for that. It's all online. And I think they probably did a presentation on this late last year, but like I said, the timing of it, we were a little busy at that time. Another thing related to some positive news. So the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, that's the federal agency related to elections specifically. They do a clearinghouse awards each year. They call them the Clearies for short, as all awards tend to do. They award programs in 8 different areas, from I voted stickers to outreach events to things people are doing to improve election security. So they look at state and local actions and they provide recognition for those. So we submitted 5 different activities and programs that we had from this past year and some of 2023 as well. Our open house, publishing our results tapes online, our I voted sticker contest, our ballot curing process, and our election officer recruitment to really ramp up our officer recruitment and narrow the partisan gap that we've had in the county. We submitted all those for awards, so thank you to the several staff members who put in a lot of time submitting those. We made some really great presentations. The board has been supplied with those, had a chance to review those, and I'm sure at some point we'll publish those online for people to see. I think some of them are really good examples of model programs that were things that I think improved either the transparency or the customer service for our voters in Prince William County. And one of the great things about the Clearies is that you go on there and you learn what other counties are doing, other counties learn what you're doing, and it provides an opportunity to develop other programs. So hopefully other people are learning from us just like we are learning from other counties and states as well.
So when do they make their announcements or their awards?
It's like late May, early June. I don't think they have a set date, but the last few years they have put out those. Now they do have a limit. You can only win 2 per county. So I don't know how they determine. If they determine you're the best of 3, I don't know how they decide which one they take away from you. But I guess that would be a good problem to have. It's
my understanding that the new chairman of the EAC is our former commissioner.
Oh, okay.
So we may have some input there.
I know that I don't know if other counties in Virginia submitted. I know that the state did put some submissions in, and there's a whole variety of things from kind of around the country. So if you're interested in checking it out, not only is there stuff from this year, but there's all the past programs from, I think they've been doing this for quite some time, and they publish all the winning programs online, so you can go online and see the best I voted stickers from around the country and the some of the model programs that are going on. So strategic objectives. So we're kind of in the draft phase at this point. I noted earlier that the presidential election is kind of a bookend of the process. I've been here for a little over 3 years now, and I think there's a number of things that from that some of those model programs that we just talked about that we've been able to implement and change and improve during that time. and now it is a good time to reassess what are the next things that we want to work on. What are the challenges that we're seeing? What are the next trends going to be? So we're kind of in the draft phase right now of examining a bunch of performance metrics, identifying the successes and challenges that we've had over the past several years, developing team goals for each of our teams, our voter registration, our mail voting, our election officer, and our operations team, as well as our admin and leadership team. And then aligning those goals with our office objectives and working with the board to sort of cull those and polish them into something that gives us some objectives over the next couple of years here. So after the drafts from the staff and the leadership team reviewing them, I'm just going to highlight a few things that we're looking at in each of these areas. And then, we'll continue to work with the board to kind of finalize these over the next couple months to help us build some objectives. So mail voting, we're working on want to develop a communications initiative to encourage early mail voting returns. This is basically because what we notice is those individuals that return their mail ballot sooner, there's less issues. There's less likelihood of their ballot not counting because of some issue. The ballots that are rejected are in large majority the ones that come in at the very end when people don't have time to cure some kind of mistake they made or an omission that they had. We were looking to improve the efficiency of the ballot processing and looking at some automation options for making that process more efficient, and looking to enhance communications to mail voters to ensure a positive experience with mail voting, which generally there seems to be a really good experience with that. People that join that permanent absentee list that get a mail ballot sent to them every election, they seem to like it. They tend to stay on that list. It's certainly, we've noticed over the years that the individuals that receive a mail ballot definitely vote at a higher rate. When you're talking about participation in your comments, Marcus, individuals that receive a mail ballot every election participate at a much higher rate than all the individuals that don't. And I think that's just the fact of, one, the people who are getting the mail ballot are probably people that tend to be more engaged already. So it's a little bit of self-selection, but they're also getting that ballot. So it's telling them there's an election happening, here's the ballot, research these candidates, make your decisions. So there's a lot of positives to that process from a participation standpoint. On the election officer front, developing next generation recruiting plans, we've done a lot with targeted letters, and we're trying to look at what the next steps are in enhancing our recruiting plans. We're getting very close to what is the overall goal. From when I got here, I felt like we were very short in terms of the number of officers we had in general, and certainly in making sure we were equal in partisan representation. But I think now we're looking at what's the next phase to sort of continue to tweak that and move that to the next level so that we reach that goal. Want to implement some kind of performance evaluation system for officers and leadership to examine, make sure that the officers that are out there are absolutely the best that they can be. And so we continue to have really excellent ratings from our county residents, and they feel like they're getting good service from our officers. And we want to continue to develop and expand the training offerings. So we're looking at how we might look at off-season trainings, looking at what the training courses are, and of course the board will be looking at that as we send you all the training plan before the next board meeting, so you all can examine what we're going to be doing the primary, and then it's kind of a continuing evolution with each election.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Do you have a way to get feedback or recommendations from election officers immediately after the election, sort of a post-election observations, things that they would like to see improved, and then how is that incorporated in your performance evaluation and evaluation of training, and how do we improve things?
Yeah, so we do two things on that front. One, we have some kind of post-election meeting, typically with the precinct leadership. So we have the chiefs We usually do like an online meeting, and a number of the chiefs come in and we have kind of like a open discussion of, hey, what issues did you encounter? What were some of the maybe shortcomings of your officers? What areas could we have trained them better? What state laws are causing friction points or issues? We do that as one component. We also do a survey of all of the officers where they provide evaluations of things like they will rate their chief and tell us how knowledgeable and helpful their chief is. They will tell us, we have some questions on that we keep the same so we can kind of see the trends overall. And then we also always adjust a few questions to maybe specific issues that arose for that election for that year. So all of that data is stuff that the election officer team takes, they look at it, they work with John, and they kind of come up with a plan of, okay, we sort of separated into two areas. Okay, what is maybe precinct 308 has some kind of particular problem that we need to address on the operational side. And then the other part is what are sort of the common things that we're hearing over and over again. We want more training on this type of thing. We want more hands-on with this particular form. We were confused about what to do in this situation. So we try to develop, after we get all that feedback, try to develop a list of what are the specific actions we need to take in particular precincts, and then what are the things that we can look at universally. And, part of this plan that we're talking about is going to be including that feedback for you all to review. We can also send you all the feedback because it has both quantitative measures in it, but we also look at the comments to see kind of, what themes are there. So we'll go ahead and send that to you all so that you guys can have a chance to review that.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. On the operations side, we're looking at ways to enhance our election day communications. There's so many different communication formats now, text messages, phone calls. One of the challenges that we often face is most of the schools get good service, but some of them we have some challenges with the reception and things like that. So we're looking at ways to improve on that, and John and the team are always kind of analyzing that and have come up with things from, we used to just do a call center to now we have sort of text groups by magisterial district so that we can get out messages on a scale that are sort of universal, but also that are in communication clusters that are small enough that it's not just 100 people all trying to text message in the same group. So,
as I remember, probably the biggest complaint we had last June was the large number of schools where there was construction going on and the voting location was moved to the back or somewhere else. I know that we did our best with signs and other things, but there may be one of those issues that you would identify is if we know that Woodbridge High School is going to be doing construction and the polling place is going to be in a different room, text that out or, convey that message to people, because I know there were a lot of frustrated voters that drove around and around buildings to try and find the polling location.
Yeah. I know we did add a lot of larger signs this time around. So we went to the print shop and we got some really large signs to put up, and we identified, John, do you know how many locations it was?
10.
Okay, so there were 10 different locations where we had either voters had communicated just generally finding issues with finding the room as it existed, or places where we knew there was a change and voters would need that. So, but we can look at what might be involved in sending an actual notice to the voters of a particular precinct before an election, if that situation arises, Keith. So I made a note of that. We want to look at improving services for provisional ballot and curbside voters. These voters are always a little bit more complicated than just this standard voter that comes in, checks in, gets their ballot, and scans it. We want to make sure that our officers are understanding these processes well and that we're training everything we need to do for those. We do want to continue to develop layers of quality control and tracking to deepen the reliability of our services. And we want to implement the new voting equipment. So that is in the budget process right now. We'll probably know if that's approved by, I think it's April that the board is scheduled to adopt the new budget. I went to the initial budget presentation meeting. There was one question about it, but didn't hear any concerns initially. And sometimes I'll get questions if there's particular supervisors that have concerns. So I'll be fielding those over the next few weeks if we have questions about that. But that'll be a big project. On the voter registration side, improving the efficiency of the same-day registration process and developing additional verification. That is just a challenging, and we came through the most challenging period of that after a presidential. In any given election, we're going to have, a couple thousand provisional ballots. But this election, I think it was more than 8,000? More than 8,000. So that is a tall task for the team to research, prep all that material for the board. They get, about a week to do all that, and there's multiple verification checks that go on there from them doing initial research on that to then the report the state sends right before you all meet to see if we've had any voters that have tried to do a same-day registration in multiple counties. It's pretty rare, but we do have to check that to prevent any potential fraud. So we want to look at ways that we can, improve that process. I'm sure the board members will have feedback. Keith and Marcus went through that in November, and I'm sure you guys will have additional feedback for that process and things that you guys would like to see to make that easier for you all, because I know you all had a couple pretty late nights there. I mean, we were all there from 10 till, 11, for a couple days in a row to get everything done. So just looking at ways that we can make that process as painless and as accurate as possible.
So I just want to say, regardless of the actual volume, Natalia has incredibly streamlined the whole provisional ballot process. I mean, back in the day, it was just a much more cumbersome process, and over the last several cycles, Natalia has really streamlined it, and it's set up to operate as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Kudos to Natalia on that. Natalia and Brittany also do a lot of work and have done a lot of planning to sort of have that ready each election. I take zero credit for that. If other GRs have called me and asked me how we do the provisional process, I say you're going to have to talk to Natalia because that is her game. So kudos to her and the team on that. The other part about voter registration is we're looking at ways we can expand data checks and monitoring of key registration areas to ensure accurate records. The state has a very robust maintenance process in place that evaluates, there are processes for voters that have moved, multiple duplicate voter identifications. So there's sort of a lot of these ongoing things that are part of the process. And one of the things our team is looking at and trying to develop is, are there things that we can do for the little things in between the cracks there to improve that accuracy. I think we do a very good job in comparative data analysis that I've done of our registration records versus other counties shows me that we're doing an excellent job. So this is just continuing to look at that and see if there's things that we can do to make sure that our voter rolls are as accurate as possible.
So since Virginia withdrew from ERIC, not the registrar,
not me,
the system.
yeah, all caps, Eric.
Since we withdrew from ERIC, we have these cooperative agreements with adjacent states. What is the status of those agreements, and what have we seen in terms of cooperation between the states and their databases, checking registration and voting activity between those cooperating states?
I mean, we get updates from them. They send us data and we send them data. Natalia, do you want to provide some additional details on that?
We regularly receive emails from different states, just checking the records or informing us on somebody registered to vote and things like that. So we do communicate with other states regarding the registration statuses
Does that just happen on an as-needed basis, or is there a recurring, regularly scheduled
as needed.
data sharing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as they're getting notifications about voter moves and things like that, those are happening. I mean, they are not going to be it is not going to be as helpful as ERIC was. I mean, ERIC was developed by multiple states over a long period of time as an efficient system to check that. And I know there's been some partisan concerns about that, but it's kind of like if you have a number of tools, if you have a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver to get a job done, well, if you've gotten rid of ERIC, you're taking the screwdriver away. Can you still do the work with the hammer and the saw? Sure. Is it going to be as good? No. So there is a process in place for that, and I think the state is continuing to develop that, but that really happens at a state level. That's not something that we are involved in the planning of. The state might solicit feedback from us from time to time on specific things. But if you're talking about the accuracy of voter rolls, not being a member of ERIC is going to make your voter rolls not as accurate. Like I said, you're taking a screwdriver and you're replacing it with a pencil or so there's another tool there, but it's not as good as the tool that the states have used to develop, because there's a lot of, when you're talking about the process now, it's those states notifying, hey, there's been a change and we're going to let you know about it. Well, ERIC was more proactive, all caps ERIC, not me. ERIC was more proactive in doing constant cross data checks on a routine basis to look for, it's not just the Department of Elections in Kentucky going, hey, we noticed this voter moved from Virginia. It's that system was constantly checking to identify those things. So it was more proactive and it was more advanced. So we'll see where that goes in the future. We do have, multi-state agreements. I don't think it's as many states as, ERIC had, but certainly, I don't have to watch some of the state meetings to see what they've been talking about related to that. So, but we do kind of get those. They just kind of come in on a rolling basis, basically. So, and then there is also the why can I think of it? The mailing confirmation.
Confirmation mailing, yeah.
Yes, the confirmation mailing that gets sent twice a year. So that does have some impact then in terms of, a mailing being sent out that lets us know if somebody is no longer at a residence. So, okay. In terms of on the leadership team, we're looking to improve the intake process for new employees. We're developing something for that. We have so many challenges we have, a small team of 18 full-time employees, but we have as many or more temp employees that come in for just a few months, sometimes 2-3 months around election time to help us as our workload increases. And so we're working to make that a little more uniform, to give our employees a little more exposure to kind of all the areas that we cover. So they have a better understanding of what we do and what our policies are. We're working on a new website, trying to look at the user experience and what pages people are using, how they're interacting with our website, and trying to develop a new website that will improve that experience and the access to information for voters. We're looking to expand our outreach and registration efforts, seeing ways that we can reach out and make sure that people that want to get registered have that opportunity. We're trying to deepen our culture of accountability and excellence. I think we've worked a lot on that over the last several years, and looking at ways that we can continue to accelerate that. And looking at public education and combating misinformation. So our open house that we had was an opportunity to do that, to share with voters how the voting process works, all the steps that we take to make sure that it is accurate and fair, this is everything from, voters don't always understand that the results you see on election night are not official results, but those are results that are the media calls from polls, from incoming results. And so helping to educate the public on things like that, on how results get reported, on how we keep voter rolls up to date, on how we ensure custody of documents in our process, all of those different things are things that we want to continue to inform the public about so that they're not misinformed. I think it's a real challenge, not just in elections, but for our society right now, that there's a lot, we're in this information age, and there's so much information out there that I think, one, people get overwhelmed by it, and so they shut down, and two, they are they are subject to it. I'm laughing because I saw a social media post about, plane crashes the other day, and somebody showing a close call at an airport. Well, it was a clip from a video game. It was a clip from Microsoft Flight Simulator. I recognized that. I could tell it was a video game. The person posted it clearly didn't know that, and so you see a lot of that. So it's a real tough battle, but we have to make sure we're doing everything we can to inform the public on how our processes work, to give them confidence in elections, and to make sure that we're giving them, accurate information and supplying them with that. So the leadership team is working to finalize that draft and getting that to the board by mid-March. So that's a big project on my plate right now to finalize that. And then once the board examines that, and at the point at which the board and our leadership team have kind of finalized what those goals are, we're going to publish all those metrics, those plans, and those goals once they're completed. So we'll have that available on our website. It'll be something the public can look at and see, the different things that we're planning to do, the different data that shows, what areas that we need to improve, areas that we have improved. So I think that'll be a really nice tool for the public, and I think it's a good opportunity for the board and our leadership team to develop things that are not necessarily compliance with the code and the process of certifying and administering elections, but also some of the softer goals of what are the bigger picture things that we want to focus on and the objectives that we want to achieve. So a couple other small things to finish up my report. Our current future office space, sorry for the misspelling there. So our current office space, which is next door here, we're in the final phase of office improvements. We've done a lot of stuff over the last couple years to improve our security in our office, to improve the operational flow that we have to accommodate the number of temps we have, to confirming everything from meeting and post-election space in this room to training sites outside. We have a very small footprint of square footage for election offices. If you look at other election offices that are in counties our size, they have a lot more room than we do. And we suffer mostly from sort of flexible space, that we have enough space for the day-to-day operations of our employees to do their job, but we really lack for space. There's a lot of things from CAP processing, electoral board meetings, officer trainings. You need a lot of flexible space, for those. If you go up to Loudon, for example, they have a lot of different rooms there that they use for different functions as the year progresses. So we are making do with what we have, and I think some of the changes we've made, outsourcing our mail ballots was a big help to not having as much space needs within our office, and we've done a number of things like that. In the near future, I think our biggest challenge right now is dedicated training space, of having some kind of space for our election officer training program. We use a variety of libraries and fire halls and churches and whatever social halls we can find around the county for that at current, but it gets to be a challenge because we don't always have guaranteed space, and we need to train the officers. So that's something that we're looking at different options for, whether that is, we've gotten one plan from from the county on modifying our warehouse to potentially have finish the unfinished part of our warehouse as a training space, to looking at potential other county space. So in terms of our next 5 to 10 years, I think that's our biggest challenge on the space front, is that having something that gives us more true flexible space to accomplish our operational needs. In the future, the county has purchased more land near the McCourt building. Our staff, several staff members did go with some planners from the county up to the Loudon office to look at their office space as an example of what our needs are. I think they were kind of surprised and blown away by what their space is there, because it works. I mean, and they also have a office and warehouse all in one space. So, whereas we have, our warehouse is over near, the Potomac Mills Mall, and so it's a good 30 minutes, which, with modern communications, we're able to communicate with staff effectively, but it would be nice sometimes to be able to just walk over to our warehouse. So there is a complex that the county's purchased land for. They're in the planning phase of that now. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 years, we will be likely in that complex near McCourt. That would move our main early voting center as well. But this is sort of like, in the distant future. But we would be one of several, I think, county offices that would be in that complex. They're mostly agencies that have need for public-facing components of their work, but also need warehouse space. So I think that there'd be some public safety, type offices, administrative offices over there, our office, and some others. So we will see where that goes in terms of the near future here. Originally, our building was going to get destroyed within 3 or 4 years because of the Courthouse project, but they changed that. The parking garage was initially going to be right out here where the current surface lot is, but they've moved that over to sort of being adjacent to where the detention center is. So we have been spared the wrecking ball for now. We will not have to work in a pile of rubble, so big plus for us. So that's kind of our current situation with our office space and where we're going in the future. So, any other questions from my report at all there?
Do you have anything? Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. One. I really thought the open house last year was a great idea. It was successful, and I would encourage you to try and maybe come up with an open house or a meeting specifically geared to members of the General Assembly and our supervisors, because when you look at the debate sometimes in Richmond about various election issues, it's clear that they're not always aware as they might be about how elections actually function. And I would we can't do it this year because the delegates are all up. They're not going to be willing to, but maybe next year it'll be the midterm elections, and that'll be so the local people will all be they won't be on the ballot. So I just encourage you to maybe try and do a focused meeting with all of our delegation in Richmond and the supervisors, so that they can actually see sort of behind the scenes the way that the public did last summer about how elections actually operate.
Yeah, that's a good point, Keith. And I think elected officials are focused on winning elections, not so much how they how the sausage is made there. So we did have a number when we did the open house. We did have Commissioner Beals did come to that. A couple elected officials. I think it was. Thalia, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Bodie and Vega were both in attendance at it. Did I miss anybody? And Chris Shorter, the county manager, came to it as well. So it was nice to see them, participating in that process. I think that certainly it would be a benefit to more of them to kind of understand how those things happen. I think we are planning on doing another sort of general open house in August, I think is the rough plan. We do want to do one again this year. I don't know that we'll have as good of attendance as we had. It might be a shorter day or a more limited opportunity, just because I don't think we'll have quite the interest level that we do during a presidential year. But I think it's a worthwhile program to continue doing. People did seem to really enjoy it. We got a lot of great feedback from people. Obviously, we got a lot of good media coverage on it. I mean, to get a 2.5-minute piece on NBC4 is not something I've seen too often in elections. So that was really great. Maybe a little bit of a slow news day, I'm not sure, but it was great for us to be able to get that information out to the public. So yeah, it's something we'll look at, and maybe we can, I don't know, it'd be interesting, maybe a multi-jurisdictional approach. We do that we just had a candidate forum last Saturday, where candidates could come in to learn more about the process. Pretty light attendance, but again, some of that is, I think that's why the timing of our open house was really good, because it was while the interest level was really high. But I think we'll continue to develop that program. We've talked about it as like a lecture series kind of Q&A thing, as that being a component of it as well, that maybe that would be something that would be useful to go around to different parts of the county and do it. So we'll continue to develop that. So okay, new business.
Okay, new business. GREB duties review.
So I know you all received this at the last board meeting, and this is something that the board worked on. I worked with Mark Dillon on this a couple years ago to really flush out what those GREB duties are, which we've developed this sort of template. And this is, the board approved that a couple years ago, and then there's something real similar. It's definitely a recommendation from Elect that the board look at these duties, once a year to make sure that everything's aligning okay. And it might be that as boards change and shift, that there are things that you all are more interested in being engaged in directly, or it might be that there's things that become onerous on a board, especially in a large jurisdiction, that you all would want to shift to the GR more. I think you all have this list, and certainly there's no required timeline that we adopt this, but I didn't know if there was discussion of different things that you all wanted to flush out and talk about.
So, Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of comments on some of these, and I don't know if it makes sense to just sort of go through numerically so we can kind of follow along, and, these are just, my views. So on the first page, 108 and 109 are kind of similar. This is public communication, communicate important election events and deadlines to the public through both print and digital media. I feel this should be a shared responsibility, and at a minimum, whatever is conveyed to the public by the general registrar perhaps should be reviewed by the electoral board before it's made. In other words, that we're all in agreement, because generally you're presenting and speaking on behalf of the electoral board, right? And so I feel as though we should have some input or some awareness of what's being said, and that if we're not in agreement, then we need to kind of work through that, because generally we do things, collaboratively and together. And so if we're made aware of what's being conveyed, I think it helps. There's two heads, in my view, are better than one. And so if we have another set of eyes, or that would be three more sets of eyes on whatever is conveyed in the public, and also particularly with the the county leadership and the state board of same thing. I want them to know that we're collaborative, working together on the same page. And if we're not, then we need to sort of, I think, look more deeply as to why we're not. Because generally, so far, in my limited experience, I have found that we are generally in agreement on all of the good things that you have implemented. So, but without knowing what's being said or being issued, I think is detrimental.
Yeah, and just for your reference, the if we do like something like we don't do press releases and that type of stuff very often. They're I mean, honestly, in normal elections, there's not usually much need for that. Certainly over the last couple of years, there's been more circumstances that have arisen nationally, locally, that have been related to that, those do all go through the board before they go out. So if we're doing a press release, we don't just send that out and then I tell the board, hey, we did a press release. We send out an email to the board, here's the draft of this, any concerns. The board usually has input, and sometimes there's discussions about, how we might express something beforehand. So that is a collaborative process, but like identifying that on these duties would be something I think that makes sense.
Okay.
So, yeah, let me just point out one example of that. So last fall, there was the chatter that there were electoral board members in Waynesboro who announced that they were not going to certify the results of the election. And, being a presidential election, there's already lots of issues and stuff out there. And so we felt, the board at that point felt it was important enough. So the three board members, Marcus and London and I, and Eric, drafted a public statement indicating that, we trusted the election process in Virginia. We plan to certify the results, and that anybody who basically saying, we're going to follow the law. It's our responsibility as electoral board members to do our ministerial duty to certify the numbers, and that was something that the three board members and Eric worked on, and we adopted it, I guess, at the September or October meeting. But that's an example. I can't think of very many others where there was, any real, difference of opinion of board members or the registrar. I think it probably makes sense to add EB to the, to the responsibility for 109, for 108. But at least I trust that you will clear stuff with us if there's any kind of controversial issue that comes up.
And then on 109, I think, again, the importance of building relationships with all of the folks in the Commonwealth as well as Prince William County with our board. I think that just makes sense. I just think it should be a shared responsibility. 108 and 109 is a shared responsibility. And then again with...
Sorry, Heidi.
I'm sorry.
I'll offer two comments on that. First of all, I concur. 108, in my opinion, seems to be more administrative. These are not controversial things. These are just deadlines that are written in the law, things that have to be published about election dates and deadlines. But 109 for sure, I think should be a more collaborative effort because who decides what's a critical issue, for example. And then with regard to certification of elections, as I've talked about with the registrar before, the Electoral Board, in my view, the Electoral Board certification of election is not a rubber stamp activity. But as Keith mentioned, if the law has been followed, the Electoral Board, under our purview, we have no ground to stand on to contradict the law that has been implemented and passed by the General Assembly, who is elected by the will of the public. The only time, in my view, that the Electoral Board would raise an objection to the certification if there was clear evidence that the law, as written, had not been followed, then we would have an obligation, in my view, to say that we need to resolve this before these results are certified. That's the only clarification I would add there. But I concur with the Vice Chair's recommendation to add Electoral Board to 108 and 109.
Thank you. Shall we go on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. 110 and 111, again, the budget. That's very important, I think, and maybe, I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but I want to be made aware of and concur with. I think it's important, especially when we're asking for a lot of money this time because of the new equipment, but still, the budget is an important thing that we should all be made aware of and be a part of, and again, under collaboration.
I think a general note for these that in terms of something that says, where it just says GR, there's some that say GR only, and I think those tend to be ones that are more statutorily defined, where it's like this is a statutory thing that is the obligation of the GR. I think when it says GR, my assumption is that I am sharing with you all important information about the budget, about operational issues, about those kind of things as they arise. But in terms of this, that's something where I'm working very directly with the OMB people on kind of a constant basis. So I communicate with you all at the milestones of that, just as an example, the funding for this project for the new equipment. There was a lot of back and forth with OMB about whether we should try to ask for those funds for just a one-time thing, spread that over a couple different fiscal years, which was an option with the vendor that we had after we had some discussions on that. So as that whole back and forth with our vendor and OMB, I'm not sharing that with you guys all at that point, but then we get to the point where we say, okay, this is an item we are gonna, push forward on, or I want to push forward on, that's when I'll communicate with you all. But here's our planned initiatives for this year. Any concerns, anything that you guys might have something, hey, I think we really need funding for this. I think we need an additional position, and that, Eric, you should ask for that money. So those are always back and forth. I think it's kind of similar. We do internal tasks on our task list where they're all assigned to ultimately one person. And that doesn't mean that that person is the only person that does it. It just means that, like, the buck stops with it, that it is ultimately I can't come in and go, well, you guys didn't do anything on the budget. What's going on here? So I think unless it's a GR only, I do think that there's always some collaboration, but happy to change, these to whatever kind of makes sense. But I just wanted to make that clear that is always I try to, as much as I can, communicate with you all. It's certainly a hard thing to balance, wanting to give you all enough information so you know what's going on and you can weigh in on decisions, but also not overwhelm you with so many things that you guys have jobs and lives. And while I dedicate 40 hours of every week of mine to this, I know that it's not the same level for board members. There might be weeks where you dedicate 40 hours to it, but that's not every week of the year. So just a couple notes overall to that.
On educating the public, participate in programs to educate the general public and encourage registration. I think we should be a part of that. I think that, as electoral board members, we have a lot of experience and could help in that regard. So I'd like to be a part of that as well.
Yeah.
I know everything I'm suggesting is more work, but I'm eager to do that.
No, that's fine.
Let's see.
That one, Heidi, by the way, that's a code-specific one. That is statutorily defined, like that it's one of my responsibilities to do that. And I think that's why the code section is there. I think that's why that's defined as that there.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me see. On 401, polling place selection, work with the local governing body to assist in the identification of polling places, provide information to county officials regarding the suitability of polling places based on state criteria, draft and assist with local ordinances as needed, assist state and county officials with redistricting every 10 years. I think that's, again, something that we should be a part of, deciding and working with, identifying polling places, selection.
Got it.
411, emergency polling place changes. Again, sometimes this is, because it is an emergency, you're under the gun and you're going to be going to new places, and I think we should be a part of that as well. That's tricky.
I think that's what, this is definitely one, when it says GR delegated, that definitely means that is a board responsibility.
I see.
That has probably been delegated to me due to the short timeline of if
Right.
we need to respond to something,
Right.
I can respond to it quickly, whereas getting you all to communicate on the same page in a short span of time might not be possible at certain times.
Right.
So I think that's why that is, but we can certainly change that to both GREB.
Let me see. Oh, okay, and then 503, this is a big one, I know you've been working on it, but we still have to get there. We have to have parity with our election officer and the assignments as well. And so I think that's an important responsibility for the electoral board to make sure each of the 103 precincts are properly represented with election officials, parity, Republicans, Democrats, adequately staffed, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, so that one we have been compliant, just for reference, point of reference. We are fully compliant with the law last year, and that is despite being in a county where, and I think most counties in Virginia are like this. Most counties have a heavy lean one way or the other. There's a few counties that are truly in the middle, but despite having a smaller pool of, Republican voters in Prince William County, we do have really good representation. That is something, though, this one is definitely the election officer policy is on the agenda for the next election.
Okay.
So I think we could incorporate that into that conversation and kind of define, that has some timelines for when we notify the board of what the assignments are, and then you guys have an opportunity in that policy to give feedback to the staff on that.
Okay.
So when we look at that, we could modify that policy to to some of the concerns that you all have raised regarding that. So,
Okay.
yeah,
The
we can.
the county can be more restrictive than the law, but not less. And so, to the registrar's point, we have met the legal requirement of parity in terms of equal numbers of each party assigned. However, as we discussed last time, in the top leadership position in our 103 precincts, it's leaned heavy in one direction. 2/3, the chief has been from one particular party. And I think in this policy, my proposal at least, and I hope the board will concur, is that we get to more equal representation in the chief positions as well, not just in total numbers.
I agree, yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
And the board has gotten involved in, I know, we've done a couple of targeted mailings to people who were they had voted in Republican primaries or, and in the areas of the counties where we needed the most Republican officers. I think that there was did you sign a letter with London? I know maybe it was.
That was
it was
Mark
Mark.
Dillon.
Okay,
and
so-
London, yeah.
Yeah, so they did a mailing specifically, with their names on it and pictures, I guess, saying, hey, we need you, we need more Republican election officers. And so, yeah, I mean, and there's always some, so having been a political party chair, when we go to the county meetings and I make a pitch for people to sign up to be an election officer, we'll get some people, but then the chair says, hey, wait a minute, you're taking away people that I want to be standing outside passing out sample ballots. So and it's only been in the last couple of years that the parties have been involved at all in approving, encouraging, signing off on people to represent them in the polling places. So yeah, we definitely have more to go, but the board has been involved in trying to reach that parity.
I do think that letter that you sent was an excellent initiative and very smart. You're targeting the people that you identified that voted in the Republican primary and just say, yeah, we need help.
Yeah.
These
It's a
things
noble
don't
goal.
run themselves.
Noble goal to be sure, but it does require participation from the parties as well. We can set the stage, but we can't force people to participate.
Right.
So,
I would say for this one, I would ask for that to remain GR delegated, just in the sense that the constant changes of that the staff has to do is something that the board probably is not going to want to be involved in on a day-to-day level. But I would change our notes field to this to say GR delegated based on the limitations and guidelines, enumerated in whatever the policy you guys finalize at the next meeting, because that'll lay out all the parameters for that on more specific things about leadership and about recruitment and some of that kind of stuff.
I would offer that there's an underlying stipulation in all of this, that all of this is board business. So we're not excluded from any of it, but I agree with Eric that having a single point of responsibility is important. Otherwise, you have diffusion of responsibility, and everybody thinks the other person is doing it or the other
Yeah.
entity is doing it, and in reality, nobody is. And then we show up and he's like, well, you guys didn't do anything with the budget.
Yeah, yeah.
So I agree with that. And I've appreciated the open communication that comes from Eric and other members of the staff. And I think we have a good relationship in that way.
Yeah.
But
Agreed.
I've never crafted an email or had a phone call where I said, that's none of your business to a board member. That would be, that would be inappropriate. All right.
And then again on, okay, so, yeah, 504 is both of us, because, you know, the board appoints and reviews these, and so if there's going to be a removal, we should have a vote, you know, the board should vote on that. And, okay, and then I guess the same thing down for 506, the non-affiliated chief officers. Again, I think, well, I think both of us, you know, that it should be both the board and the general registrar's responsibility.
and I believe that's only happened
With a vote,
once.
right?
I'm sorry?
And then followed up, you know, with a vote. Let's see, if he appoints a chief not affiliated, the general register must notify within 10 days to allow for additional nominations. Yeah,
Are you talking about are we still in 506?
sorry,
Okay.
yes. Mhm.
The official board adopted policy is the parties are hereby on notice that we will use nonpartisan officers in all elections. We do keep them under the threshold that the code provides, but we do find the need generally to do nonpartisan officers, both because just to round out the officer pool, but also it helps in situations where, let's say you have a precinct that has 8 people and you've got, or let's say 9 people, and you've got 4 Dems and 4 Republicans and 1 nonpartisan officer, and let's say you lose a Dem at the last minute. Well, now if you don't have a Democrat to replace them and you appoint another Republican, now technically you're out of compliance with the code, because now you have more than one, you have 2 people more than one party, and the code says you should be either even or within 1. So in that instance, a nonpartisan officer is useful because you're putting them in to keep in compliance with the code in that situation. And those are usually where the challenges lie. When we get to 30 days out or so, Dina and Rick have a really good, handle on, okay, everybody's 50-50, everything's perfect. And then the best laid plans all, fall to the wayside, because you never know when on Friday you're going to have 4 officers from the same precinct all call and cancel, or, sometimes we have family members that serve together, and that can throw things out of whack. So, anyway, that's all to say that is also in the policy, and we can adjust that as needed. But I think that both parties understand and know that we do consistently use some nonpartisan officers. But the nonpartisan officers also know that they are not the chosen ones when it comes to election officers. Are party representatives. They have higher priority. That's just what the code demands.
Point of clarification, though, under the code, that nonpartisan officer cannot be the chief or assistant chief without notification to the affiliated parties, right?
Correct.
And 10-day
Correct.
notification, which would then require participation from the board to approve.
Yes.
I think that was your concern, correct?
Yeah, and we could address that. We could address that specifically in the policy and put a clause in there for that. I don't think that's there, and that does happen occasionally. That's usually those, like, it's 3 days to go, and the only person we have that has some leadership experience is a nonpartisan person, and that makes it difficult in those
I
circumstances.
would recommend we put that, include that in our policy if it's not
Yeah.
already there.
Okay.
Could I ask about 508, election officer public list?
Yeah.
So, first, I assume we have it. So what information is available? And second, does anybody ever actually come in and look at it?
I don't think so. It'll have the name of the officer. It'll have the same thing that you guys have in front of you. The name of the officer, the precinct where they reside, and their party affiliation or lack thereof. And it's a list that we have at the public at the front counter. But Natalia, do we have that many inquiries on that? I think it's pretty rare. So
there's no identifying information about, where someone lives?
no, we don't put their address or
information
contact
or
information. We're required to put the list out there of the officers, but we also do want to protect people's privacy, and you never know when, somebody might be trying to find out information on somebody in some sort of backhanded way, so, yeah, we don't make that available.
Okay.
You're on a
then-
roll.
Training. So 509 and 511 and 512. So I think it is, training our election officers is a really important responsibility, and I think as involved as we can be in terms of overseeing and even participating in training is important. I don't know, again, I'm new here, so I'm eager to get right in it, and I feel like training is really important. So if I've been doing training for 5 years, I'd say, yeah, you just go ahead and do it, but I haven't, so I'm eager to be a part of it and see how it goes, see what could be improved. Maybe there aren't issues or problems, but I don't know that until I understand how we are training.
Yeah.
And it should be a team effort, it seems to me, at least our board, I feel like it should be a team effort.
It is, I honestly think 510 should probably just be EB. That one should probably, because really these are kind of in conjunction. 509 is really, our team develops a training plan.
Right.
And then it's in the code. I think it's in the code just before general elections, if I'm correct. That before a general election, the board has to approve the training plan. So as we go up to general elections, we're required to, and this has been a part of the board meetings. If you probably the previous one, if you wanted to look at, I would guess it would be July or August of like 2024. We probably discussed it in a meeting.
Okay.
We've sort of modified this. So there's a number of things that are only required, like the training plan, the ballot order. There's like 4 or 5 things that like getting the number of equipment, the number of ballots, the training plan are all things that the board reviews. And there's some of them that are only required for the general and some that are required for all elections. And we just generally have moved towards, we just do them all for each election because it kind of makes sense to sort of check in on those with the board incrementally. So I think for 509 is really about our office taking the time to properly prepare a plan for the board. And 510 is about the board going through and reviewing that plan and then certifying it in compliance with the code. So I would say it would probably make sense just to change 510 to just the EB, because really 509 is our part.
Right.
And 510 is the board's component of that.
Got it. Okay. Okay, 511 and 512, I, for some reason I wrote both, that we should both be involved, the training minimums, but as I'm reading it now, I'm wondering if that's necessary or not. And then the special training, we should probably, again, be involved in that, again, as a team effort.
I think 511 is really just about Dina and her team making sure that everybody that is assigned to the election has checked
Training.
that box and completed whatever the training plan the board adopts
Right.
and those things that are required, and that is different from role. So if you're just a regular election officer working at a precinct, you might have, this training class and something else you have to do. If you're a chief, you might have several things. And in the code, once annually, the leadership individuals do have to complete specifically like an equipment training. So I think that is just making sure that we're checking off that box. And then what I could tell you what they do too is that if we reach a point, I don't know what that point is that like 2 weeks or 4 weeks before the election, Dina, where if somebody hasn't completed training and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, there comes a point where Rick and Dina basically purge okay, you 17 are out because you're not following through on what you're supposed to do. And then we see if we can get some substitutes on that to fulfill those roles. So I think that's what 511 is specifically about.
Okay. Okay. The ballot layout, I'm sorry, number 603. Okay, so this does say that the EB, along with elect, must design and lay out ballots, but over in the responsibility, it has, yeah, it has GR delegated. So the EB, along with elect, must design and lay out ballots according to instructions titled Ballot Standards and Verification Procedures. I think both of sets of eyes, that is the GR and the Electoral Board, on the ballot layout, I think this is important. It's a one-time thing, here's the ballot, and we should all, it's sort of like a final approval, like this is what the voters are gonna see.
Yeah, that it is. I will say it's very prescribed. So there's not like. So John is the one on our staff who goes through and does the ballot layout, and it's basically the state has a manual. It's available online. It's probably 50 or 60 pages long, and it's very like this title has to be in this font at this size and in bold, and it's very like there's most of the discretion around ballot layout is really just trying to make sure it will fit in onto one card, basically, like on a front and back, as opposed to having to have it be. I worked when I was in Montgomery County, we had an election where we had a 3-card ballot. So each ballot that we handed to people was 3 different pages. And it was a nightmare because at the end of each day, we'd have, when we were doing results, we'd have, 1,000 voters, and we'd have 999 page 1s, 984 page 2s, 965, just people were not scanning all the pages they were supposed to. So, and that's ultimately on the voters to do that process, but it's a very prescribed thing, but certainly we can, include the board in that. Really what happens is John lays it out and we then send that to the state, and the state has a team that goes through. We have a team on our staff that all reviews them, and then the state goes through and they review it, and they either approve or reject it, and if they notice something that doesn't meet the standards, we have to go back and revise it. But we can include you all in that review process because more eyes would be helpful as we're going through. That's usually a real tight, like, that's we find out the time at which we find out who the candidates are, and then we get that information from elect, and then when we have to have the ballots completed to get them read over to the printer for mail ballots is usually like 5 days. Yeah, so sometimes it's like 2 days, sometimes it's a week. It's a real tight timeline, but we can let you all know about that and give you all an opportunity to kind of participate, see that as it goes along.
Okay.
Well, and it hasn't happened recently, but a number of years ago, we had a situation where the ballot that was approved didn't reflect the candidate's name. The candidate said, I want the ballot to say Ernest W. Porta, and Ernie in quotes or something. And the issue was there were several names on the ballot that, either the nickname or somehow, the name that appeared on the ballot wasn't the name that the candidate had specifically requested in all the paperwork that they did. Now, and that's something that, we might catch just because we know these people, we're aware of most, and you all are not partisan, so you may not be aware of some of the other things going on, but especially for primaries, just another set of eyes, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah, we get the other way too, where they put it on their form and then they see it and they go, I didn't want that. We're like, well, that's what you wrote that on your form. Sometimes they change their mind down the road. So yeah, it is a very tedious, meticulous process to make sure those are all. And of course, there's not just one ballot. There's all the ballot style for every single precinct. So we're talking about reviewing, a couple hundred different ballots for each election. So it is always a challenge, but I'll note that on here for the change.
On 610, delivery of ballots to the precinct. The EB must designate a member or a registrar or an employee to deliver to an officer of election of each precinct the official ballots for that precinct and obtain a receipt for the package or packages. Are these, is this done, the people that deliver these, is it a team, like 2 people, or is it just 1 person, or how does that work?
John, you want to field the?
Yeah, so we usually have a team of, our contractors make the delivery, and the electoral board also adopted a policy before the last election to have an election officer follow those trucks, and they're the ones that sign off. Well, they don't sign off, but they submit a form to us indicating that the equipment has been dropped off. So our ballots are dropped off with the equipment cage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's done the Monday before the election, very early in the morning. Usually takes about 8 hours.
Okay, so because, you know, chain of custody and security about these ballots, you know, is very important.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Okay, let me see. Okay, well. (706), so I don't have a lot of experience with contractors and contracting documents, but I do know the fine print, you know, is very important. And so, with the approval of the electoral board or general registrar may contract with the voting equipment vendor or another contractor to program, prepare, and maintain the voting machines. If this is done, the custodian's role will be to instruct and supervise the vendor or contractor technicians and oversee the programming, testing, calibrating, and delivering of the equipment. So this is essentially how we're, you know, counting our votes, is through this equipment and how the equipment is, you know, put together. And so, like I said, I'm not an expert in these kinds of things, but if there were to be any, I don't know, omissions or oversight or questionable clauses in the contract, it could be detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this should be a joint undertaking, and I do think that there should be a vote on the contract to purchase. Do we do that?
No. So that falls under more the operations and my purview, but certainly if we have so I think this one specifically is more about the vendor preparing and maintain. So I think this is less about the contract, like the contract overs, like our purchase of the equipment. Which, you know, we'll talk about that more when we talk about our equipment security today. We'll talk more about that process, and certainly you all can have access to anything you want to regarding that. There is a thing in the code about custodians of the equipment where only certain people are allowed access to the equipment. So just as an example, we have an IT department in our county that provides us support for like our computers and stuff in the office. They are not allowed to actually go and interface with our election equipment because the list of people that can do that is very small. Those at this table, a few of our staff, and then it allows for the vendors to come in and do that in some instances. Now, in our county, we're a larger county, we have highly technical staff. We have people, we handle that in-house. So there's a lot of counties where, let's say, you only have 2 staff. So there's so many things to do. Even though they're a smaller county, you still have to do all these things, whether it goes out to 2 precincts or it goes out to 100 precincts. So in a lot of counties that are smaller, they will have the vendors actually come in and help them. They're making the ballots, they're programming their equipment, they're there for logic and accuracy testing. So they're doing all the functions that our staff actually does. And we don't use, the vendors don't come into our election space outside of every few years if there is a new update or something like that, and they come and they work with our staff in those instances and they provide support for that. But those are all things that are happening where the board is, they're either public events where they're observers and the board obviously can come, or things that the board can come be a part of. So, and I know our past board members have come to, logic and accuracy testing and a lot of these different components where we're working with the machines, because that is a very sensitive, part of the process. And I think if you're looking at the overarching, like the things that are most important to the board, certifying elections, appointing and overseeing the election officers, and ensuring the the security of the election equipment are certainly the big areas that that you all have both a lot of control over and are also like extremely important to elections. So I think this one mostly focuses on the fact that those contractors, that there's limitations on that custodian role. If the custodian is a term that's in the code and used in that particular section in 242632, and it's to limit who has access to the equipment. And that's certainly something, as we talk about the equipment security policy and us in our compliance with the state standards, that we'll discuss some of those things, because that is a standard that we have to meet for security.
Okay.
So
All right, and I think, okay, now I'm on to 902. No, that's fine. So this is all certification. Board must deliver the certification of the results of the count together with all the ballots and envelopes to the clerk of the circuit court. Yeah, that's both of us. Yeah, I don't know why I circle that, sorry. Election tiebreakers, okay, that's fine. And then winning certificates, okay. And then 907, the last one, return of materials on election day. The board or general registrar may direct the return of all materials from the precinct to the office of the general registrar instead of the clerk of the circuit court. I think it's important that this be overseen by both, because we don't want unused ballots floating around. We want to make sure that all of the materials are returned, and that there's, that everything kind of checks out. We don't want unaccounted materials. So anyway, having never done this before, I just want to make sure that nothing,
oh yeah, I mean, you guys are always welcome to come observe that process. I don't know if Marcus, you saw that. Oh, but yeah, you were at the warehouse on election night to see the return of materials and the results reported. So you guys are always welcome to participate in that. I think the coordination of that, this might be something in like a small county that has 3 precincts where the board's actually doing that. But in our instance, the return of those materials, the box 3s and the box 6s, is actually happening at 2 different locations. So it happens at our office. Most of the western part of the county returns their materials here. The eastern part of the county returns them to the warehouse. And we have intake teams at both locations that are, making sure that the boxes that the materials that were supposed to be returned are returned, making sure that things were sealed as they were supposed to be. And then we have the canvass process, and those materials get returned in groups, I guess I would say, to the clerk of the court for them to hold custody of them until such a matter would arise that they would be, lawsuit or a recount or something like that where they would be needed again. So the 3s and the 6s just immediately go over to the courthouse, and then some of the other documentation that happens that the canvass teams look at stays with our office and the board through that process from the day after, from election night through whenever that canvass process, concludes. Usually it's the next day or within 2 days that most of it goes back over to the courthouse at that point. So that is something you are involved with. I think it says GR just because it primarily falls on me to coordinate with my team all the people that are interfacing with the officers as they're returning those materials to our office. So.
Okay. So those are my comments.
Any other discussion? Do we have a motion?
Madam Chair, question, or Vice Chair, sorry, Madam Vice Chair. Do we want to hold this until the next meeting while we work through some of these
Yes,
recommendations?
yes,
Okay.
that's
I,
fine.
I took notes on all the revisions you guys want to see, and I can make those revisions, highlight them in the new draft, send that to you all, then you all could adopt this at the next meeting, if that makes sense for you all.
Okay,
In that case, Mr. Chairman, I move that we table this until March's meeting, and we're in March's meeting, April's meeting, pending these updates, and vote on it next time.
I second.
All right, that sounds a good idea. So we'll pass, we'll do that. All right. Next issue is election officer appointments.
Okay, I need a brief restroom break. I think John can walk you through this one anyway, because it's really his area, and I think we already have, so if, I'm gonna hand this over to John, and I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so do you want to start with the new ones, with the new list, or
Sure.
the people who the Republican Party objected to or nominated? The new people?
The new, yeah.
So last month, we collected 8 new applicants to become election officers, 3 Dems and 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans and 2 nonpartisan. We received no objections from either party, so these are set to be approved by you all.
This is a short list.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
very short list.
All right. Do a motion?
I move that we accept this new list of new election officer appointments dated March 5, 2025.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Approved, so these people are added.
All right, so the next list is the list of updates that we received from the Republican Party. We had about 201 nominations from nonpartisan to Republican, and we had 43 objections from Republican election officers to be objected by the Republican Party that will now be listed, if approved, as nonpartisans.
All right, so the last 2 pages, basically, of the list, the ones in pink are people who the party objected to having them represent, so they will be nonpartisan.
That is correct. Yep.
Okay.
And the first couple of pages are nonpartisan officers who the party nominated to represent the Republican Party.
So this will add to the pool of
Yes.
Republicans.
So
Okay.
looks like we have a net gain of about 150 Republican election officers once this is approved, or if you all approve this. So overall, this is a good update right here. And it'll help our Republican election officer total.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the modified list as submitted by the parties.
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So we have 150 new Republican election officers.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Next item is legal referrals.
This was an item that Marcus noted he wanted to kind of come back to. So during the last election, we sent 4, it was initially 5, I think it was 4 referrals to the Commonwealth's attorney for a couple of different things of, potential, fraud or conduct. One of them was a ballot that was sent in by someone who was recently deceased, likely a family member. I think they died about a week before the mail ballots were sent. And the ballot was sent back, likely a family member or somebody else sent one back in. A couple instances of individuals who both went to early voting and then also mailed in ballots. And then one instance of an individual who was working with seniors to assist them at a senior home, and we got a complaint from a voter that the person that was assisting them was working with, I guess, their parents, and that the person was not mentally capable of communicating some of the things that the person had done that was assisting them with that process. So we referred all those to the Commonwealth's attorney shortly before the election. I should note too that in all these instances, the individuals who mailed a ballot, if they voted early, they were not given a second ballot. It was caught by our team, and the system worked like it's supposed to. We did send them to the Commonwealth's attorney for their, investigation. They did get back to us to know that they're not moving forward with any of those. I don't know the particulars of that. I don't know if they decided it was, not a worthwhile use of resources, or if they had insufficient evidence, and after they investigated them. I do know that sometimes in my experience over the years, when you have an early voter and someone mails in a ballot, a lot of times that is senility, more so than someone attempting criminal conduct. I've been at early voting where people have come in and said, I'm not sure if I voted this election, can you look it up? Because I think this is more common in Virginia because we have elections every year. People get confused sometimes. So we see that sometimes. So anyway, I know Marcus wanted to kind of go back to it, especially on the issue of assistance to seniors. I don't know if this is an area that either our staff or the board has much say-so in. It might be a party training issue of making sure that the individuals who are representing the parties and going out to these types of homes are either properly trained or understand when they might need consent, maybe beyond what that voter can provide. I'm sure that's difficult. I don't know that the person who did that was necessarily doing it with a malintent, I guess I should say. But it did rise to the level that I felt like it was appropriate that we report it. And I know that Marcus kind of wanted to revisit that and look at what what are the guardrails there? And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of answers in that way, but I know you wanted to kind of to talk about it.
My thought on that is, especially as I recall that particular incident, there was also the other side of that issue was that the assisted living facility itself had requested absentee ballots for all of its residents, if I recall correctly. Do you remember that?
It was something related. I think they provided an opportunity for people to do. I think they gave out forms and they collected them to send them back in for them.
Okay, so I may have to go back and look at the details of what was reported again, but the way I originally understood it was that the assisted living facility had requested that for everybody in the facility, whether they asked for it or not. In which case, if that's true, I think I would recommend at a minimum maybe an informational letter that gets sent out to these assisted living facilities telling them you cannot do that.
Okay.
And then, of course, cooperation from the parties and folks that are taking the training to do voter registration drives. Renewed emphasis on what is and is not permissible in terms of assisting voters in that way.
Okay. I mean, that's definitely an action we could take of identifying the senior homes and communities in the county and notifying their staff of what they can and can't do.
Right.
And informing them of potential training opportunities, related to that as well.
And also watchful eyes on the part of the assisted living facility staff if they see a volunteer coming in to do voter registration. If they see that volunteer doing something that has been articulated in this informational letter that is not permissible, for instance, signing people's name at the bottom of their ballot.
Yeah.
So that we have extra sets of eyes in these facilities as well, people who know what is and is not permissible.
Okay. Okay.
And for the 4 cases that were referred to the Commonwealth Attorney, I would ask that we reach out to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office and ask for what the final resolution was, one way or the other, and what their justification was. I know we can't force them to communicate with us, but I would at least like to ask so we can close the loop.
Okay.
I also noted in my analysis that there were 41 attempts as recorded to vote more than once or by more than one means. And I know there's investigation that the Office of Election does to determine whether or not those are actionable.
Yeah.
Are you able to speak to why only 4 of the 41 were referred?
Well, no, I can look at the analysis of it. I mean, in part at this point, there's not a timeline for that. In other words, I can, oftentimes that takes a little while after the election to happen because it's just not a high priority item. I would say that if we refer things and they are not investigated further, then it is not a productive use of my time to continue to do a lot of research and things on those. To send them, I don't think of the ones you're mentioning that many of them fall in something that I would refer, but we can look at that and provide an additional report at the next meeting on those specific ones and kind of where they fall. And if you all think that we should refer particular groups of those, I'd be happy to do so. I think that in terms of the reach out, I think that might be better coming from the board. If the board wants to send a letter to
I'm happy to do
to
that.
the Commonwealth's attorney, stating their position on whether they should, all I can do is provide them the information.
Sure.
And I don't have any part of the process in terms outside of providing them the information and the documentation that we have, which is limited, and any follow-up questions they have, but whether they investigate the matter or whether they don't, and I've seen that go all ways over the years. I've seen referrals that it's just not a large enough offense to be worth the time. I've seen ones that they do investigate them and then they find that there was, benign reasons that led those investigators to not bring charges based on further information that they found out. And everything in between. So,
And I'm not looking to make more work for your office, but I think in the instances of those 41,
okay.
as it came out in the data analysis, it's essentially somebody either already on election day they tried to vote and they had already cast an absentee ballot, or they had already tried to vote in some other way. And so I think the research could almost be 2 sentences for each of them, or maybe even collectively as a group.
Yeah.
With the name that says this person attempted to vote on election day, had already cast an absentee ballot, or tried to vote more than once during early voting, or whatever the case might be. And then, unless there's any further discussion on that, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the board, and I'm happy to take the lead on this, construct a letter to the Commonwealth Attorney asking for the final adjudication and resolution on the 4 cases that have already been referred, as well as these additional 41. I'll draft a letter and submit it to the board for approval, obviously not to be sent without our agreement.
Okay.
Second?
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So the 41 that you identified, so that's based on the provisional process, or how did you identify those 41?
Okay, so I had asked, after the election, I'd asked Eric and Talia to provide all of the instances for rejected ballots for whatever reason, and they provided that to me with the reasons for the rejection. And I essentially compiled all of those for early voting, election day, and post-election, and provisional ballots as well, into one file, pivoted it out. This was the result. I can share that with you as well.
Okay.
So the reason they were rejected due to already having voted was the reason for rejection. Okay. And
then, I'm sorry, there were also 21 that were prohibited matches. So somebody that tried to vote and maybe was a felon or, whatever.
okay, gotcha.
So I've shared this with, I thought I had sent this to everybody, but if I haven't, I'll send the analysis to the other board members as well. Actually, Madam Vice Chair, you wouldn't have been part of the board at that time.
Right,
So-
so I appreciate to see that, yeah. So, in other words, well, I guess does your analysis probably explain all this, but I mean, if someone thought that they had not voted and showed up to vote, and then were told, you've already voted, is that what we're talking about, or?
I think these are mostly mail and provisional ballots where the person voted in person already, and then we received a ballot from them.
Okay,
And
and then you reject that ballot?
yeah, we reject the ballot because
Because
they've already voted. When
Right, and
when
that's the list of 41.
Right.
Yeah, when the election officer teams are doing their final review of the ballot to decide whether to accept or reject it, they have a poll book that they look up the voter, and if they see that the voter has already voted, during early voting or on election day, then they're going to reject that ballot.
Yep.
And I guess it would be, I think Keith might be able to speak to this too. In the past, I don't think we generally we haven't referred provisional voters in that regard. If some of these are provisional rejections, because I think those voters, I think it's assumed that if they're voting provisionally, they know they're documenting that, they know they're affirming certain things on that provisional envelope. And it's an assumption that there must be some confusion about it. And we do I will say the mail ballot team will get ballots from during the general, counting how many other election ballots do we receive? 20, 50, 100? I mean, I think people just they know there's an election going on and they see that they have a ballot at home and it's from the primary and they got it back in February and they put it in an envelope and they send it in. So, I think there are a lot of mistakes and confusion, but I think narrowing down what are the groups that we're talking about. I mean, the ones that we referred were very clear, okay, this person voted, 2 weeks ago, and then they came in. But now maybe they have mental issues and they, maybe they have Alzheimer's, maybe they have some other condition that creates that problem, and the system does catch that so that we're not having 2 votes for any voter. But the determination of at what point do you refer those things, and at what point is it just cumbersome, and at what point, I mean, we did refer somebody, and then as we did more research, we found out that it was actually an officer mistake that had been made, where it was we had someone checked in that same day with the name, the first and last name were different by 1 letter. So the officer clearly made a mistake. Luckily, they were voting provisionally anyway.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So on election day, especially those who voted provisionally on election day, do you remember how the deadline for the mail ballot, to receive the mail ballot is noon on Friday, and it has to be mailed before on election day? So those who sometimes mail their ballot 2 weeks before the ballot hasn't been received, they don't have any other option but vote provisionally if they want for their vote to count. So at that point, we have no control over USPS. We don't know when that ballot arrives. That person is basically trusting us to cast that provisional ballot, and they do a lot of those. And I know Dean probably would have the same feedback from the officers. Some of those voters who do come on election day and they say, yes, I mailed my ballot, however, I haven't heard back from your office that the ballot has been received. We inform them it is a provisional ballot, so they say, I understand that if you receive my mail ballot, then of course my provisional wouldn't be counted. I understand that. So again, we don't know if we received that ballot or not, if it would arrive on time or not, but again, only one of the ballots will be counted, whichever ballot we have at the deadline, if that makes sense.
It does.
Some of those we would receive later, and you will see that note already voted as a reason for rejected because we received it by Friday noon and we were able to count that.
So they're
That's-
not individuals that are trying to vote twice. They're individuals that
trying
just
to
want to make sure they vote
Yeah,
once.
They're just trying to
Okay.
vote a lot.
That's a very good point, Natalia. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So there's a presumption of good intentions on the part of a lot of these voters.
I think for
And-
provisional voters especially.
And unfortunately, due to the way the system is constructed, where people can actually have a vote counted after election day, as long as they mailed it on or before Election Day, it introduces some of this potential confusion into the system, and it really relies on a crack team of experts to catch it, right? And the good news story in this is that in all 62 of these instances, 41 of dual ballots and 21 of prohibited matches, all of them were caught by the crack team of experts. So that's a good thing, but the potential for those types of things to slip through the cracks is still there. Did we miss any? We'll never know, right? And we can talk about this more later, I guess, after we've had time to formulate our thoughts on it. But perhaps in these, I know every time a provisional ballot is rejected, a letter goes out to that person telling them that their ballot was rejected. But as a deterrent, as well as for voter education, maybe in these instances, that letter should be sculpted a little bit more precisely, letting them know that there's an appearance here that you may have attempted to vote more than once, and spelling out to that person the implications of that and legal consequences if they ever did that intentionally and were caught.
I think that's where it gets hard in my role, because if I'm referring these individuals, then communicating with them about a potential crime and notifying them of that it would be like letting someone who tried to rob a store know that we know you robbed a store, and interfering with a police investigation of that. So,
but if we don't have enough evidence,
I'm just saying it's a hard balance to strike.
Sure.
There is so by code, we have to notify those whose votes were rejected. So they did receive a letter.
Yeah.
And it is a state generated from our system letter. To this day, I have not heard anyone who called back or complained anything that something was wrong or I didn't, so that's just, there was no feedback on those letters that we sent out of rejected votes. But it does, I believe it states, we can provide you with the template of that letter.
Yeah, I would like to see that.
Yeah, I think it would be useful to look at the 41 and see what kind of groups they break into. Are a lot of them the scenario Natalia described? Are some of them senility cases? Are some of them, attempts? You see it more. It's more clear if it's a kind of a repeat at someone that shows up to vote. But anyway, we could break that down a little bit further and talk about that more and try to a rubric for when referrals would happen and when they wouldn't happen would be helpful. It's left to a lot of judgment, and so it's definitely a difficult thing. As a registrar, I don't want people who are not qualified to voting. I don't want people who have already voted voting. I also know that in my experience, most of the time, the mistakes that you see are either innocent ones or people that are just trying to preserve their right to vote and without the knowledge of whether their mail ballot has arrived. I want to make sure my vote counts. So it's hard to balance the referring people, making sure that individuals are following the law and referring them when it's proper, and not overstepping and risking. I mean, registrars have gotten sued for being overzealous on some of these types of things, where the individual then felt like their rights were being infringed upon and sue the registrar. So it's a tough balance, and I think that there's probably some. I think the ones we referred were pretty clear cases, and there was a small number of them, and that's why of the ones you're talking about, there were 4, because we're like, well, these are clear ones, we need to refer these. And then there are probably ones where it's like, it seems very clear that nobody had an ill intent here, and I would recommend these not be referred. And then there's probably some that fall really in the middle where, board guidance and some discussion of how and when that happens would be helpful. It'd probably also be helpful to have some state guidance overall in this, but Virginia's a more decentralized state, and that's just how it works. So
I think those are all fair points, and we can deliberate on how to address that better. I do think some deterrent would be helpful. for the handful of people who may have been trying to do something untoward. And I would encourage people who find themselves in that situation, the best way they can ensure that their vote counts is not wait till the last minute.
Yeah, and communicate with our office, because, I mean, in those instances, for those male voters, you know, the majority of our voters don't have it, but a lot more voters have signed up for the mail ballot tracking, where you get text message updates and you can go online and see exactly what the status of your ballot is. And if you have that tool, then it lets you know, okay, oh, they did get my ballot 3 days before the election, and I see it's been, you know, processed now. So, so availing yourself of those opportunities is helpful, but you're never going to get 100%, you know, buy-in on those.
And just
kind
for
of
the
things.
edification of the broader public, there were, as was mentioned, almost 8,000 provisional ballots that came in. I believe the exact number was 7,954.
Yep.
And of those, 1,000, and we looked at every one of them, of those, 1,109 were rejected for one reason or another. Two of those reasons we've been discussing at length here. But all sorts of reasons. Same-day registration forms not filled out correctly, missing information, invalid residencies. So again, I say that as a two-part statement. One, excellent job on the part of the registrar and his staff in catching all of those. But also it points to either a voter education issue or lack of planning, whatever. So it's a two-part statement. One very good side. The team did a great job, but then also educating the public, so hopefully we can avoid these problems in the future.
Yeah, I think that the thoroughness of the staff reviewing that, on top of the thoroughness which the board applied to it in reviewing all those, really ensures that of those 8,000, that, you know, you're gonna push your mistakes down as close to zero as you possibly can. So, okay. All right, I've got a few notes for that, and we'll, you know, revisit that at future meetings, and we'll get you guys some more data on kind of how we group those. Okay.
Office hours.
Office hours. So, under the code, our office has to be open a minimum of 5 days a week. There are a few exceptions for things like training days, where we have a day of training where we close the office for a half day or a day every once in a blue moon. Usually that's in a, you know, very far away from an election. The hours may be determined and set by the general registrar or the electoral board. So in the interest of EBGR duties, here's a very clear, either one can do it. So we have had some conversations internally about modifying our, it's got a battery low thing. No. Okay. Thank you, Thalia. We do it the old-fashioned way. So we have a recommendation from staff to change our office hours from the current hours, which are 8:30 to 5, to the suggested hours of 8:30 to 4:30. And if you can go to the next, oh, I got it back. Okay. Yeah, it's working again. Okay, thank you all. Good tech support. Okay, so the reasons for this are, one, we've got a lot of confusion during early voting this election, where people were coming in person and they'd say, I thought you guys were open for early voting until 5, and we close early voting at 4:30. We find that generally early voting really drops off around 3. It starts to just kind of curtail towards the end of the day. The exception of that was the late evening one we had. It jumps back. 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock are our lowest hours, and then 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock were among our busiest hours. So clearly there's some people that are coming after work that it's helpful for, but not so much from 3:30, 4:15, those types of times. So unfortunately, on Elect's website, and I wrote them an email about this, asking them to add a caveat to their website. I didn't hear back. That basically they publish all the office hours on the site. So people sometimes go to the state site, they look at the office hours, and they don't realize that early voting and office hours and locations are two different things. Also, if you go to Google, you're just going to get the office hours. You're not going to get necessarily the early voting hours unless you go to our website, which is usually among the top results. But sometimes people just go to the business organization profile where it has the office hours. So Now, we don't get a lot of walk-in customers either in terms of our office hours. We had one in January. That's the whole month, one person that walked through the door, and that's really because after an election when things are slow, there's not a lot of registration activity. Also, most people are doing this online now. The registration process in particular is largely online, and we certainly see a lot more people using same-day registration than necessarily coming in through our doors to do that. So this would also improve a little schedule and flexibility for our staff, a little focus time where we're not open to the public at the end of the day to wrap up some things. And also when we're managing schedules for the public-facing part of our business, having a little bit more flexibility is helpful. So we looked at other offices in Prince William County. They're kind of variable. They're generally open somewhere between 8 to 9 hours, and they're generally open at 8 or 8:30, and generally closed somewhere between 4 and 5. The exception would be places like the landfill or libraries where people are using those services either early in the morning or late at night. But in terms of sort of the like offices like ours where they're interfacing for some sort of registration or paying taxes, ours are pretty similar to theirs. Similar for other, we looked at the contiguous county election offices here, and they all have somewhere between an 8 and 9 o'clock opening and a 4:30 to 5 p.m. closing. So our suggestion would be, and I wanted to, this is, again, and since it's an OR area, I would rather have the board's approval on this and discuss this collaboratively. Does the board agree with this recommendation for the office hours to be changed from 8:30 to 4:30 on a day-to-day basis, with the exceptions that anytime there are late hours for early voting, Saturdays where it goes till 5, well, Saturdays in general, anytime there's evening voting, we go ahead and extend the office. We really have to have people in the building when there's early voting happening at our main office anyway, so we go ahead and we keep the counter open during those hours in case we can assist voters that might need it. And this, of course, we could reconsider if at some point the Electoral Board changes the early voting hours, which is our next item of business. So does the board want to discuss this, or would it make sense to go through the early voting hours first and then look at it all as a package, as a whole?
We've seen it all already.
Okay.
If we did the look ahead, but for the benefit of everybody else, I would recommend we go through both
Okay.
and then act on both at the same time. Sir?
That's fine.
Okay, so the early voting hours, under the Board of County Supervisors ordinance, all primary, special elections, satellite offices will open on Saturday, 10 days before the election, through the Saturday prior to the election. So basically, what we're going to see for this election is from the two Saturdays before the election to the Saturday just before the election, those 8 straight days from Saturday to Saturday, including Sunday, all the satellite locations are going to be open, and of course the main office will be open for several weeks before that. And this was a change last year because honestly for primary elections we had 3 sites open, and we'd have days where we'd have literally like 14 voters that would come through at all 3 locations. So it was not really that useful. What this does is this puts more locations open closer to the election when we see more voters going through. So the days that used to be an electoral board function, it's now a county supervisor's function, but the hours are still alive with the board. The only stipulation here is that the satellites have to have the same hours, and they have to be open 6 hours or more. So they didn't want, in the ordinance language, didn't want a situation where some part of the county that leans one direction would be open while the other part is closed, and also that they're all open the same number of hours for that exact same reason. These chairs, yeah, the new chairs were not an improvement. So Virginia Code, early voting will start at our office on May 2nd. Under the ordinance, early voting will take place on those 8 straight days that I described. For this primary, that is June 7th through June 14th, that's Saturday to Saturday. The hours in the past for the Electoral Board, these have worked pretty well for us, 8:30 to 4:30 on weekdays, and then 8:30 to 7 p.m. on Wednesdays, with Saturday really basically being set. It's a requirement in the code that it ends at 5, and we could do it from 9 to 5 on that day, but changing the start time just means more potential confusion, so we've just left that at 8:30. And then Sundays, we have been doing 11 to 5, just because we don't have a lot of Sunday morning voters, and it's also hard to get enough election officers on Sunday mornings. People have church and football preparations and all kinds of other things that intersect with Sunday mornings. So, so those are the hours in the past. So we would like the board to go ahead and adopt those for this election, just so we can publish those for the public, for anybody that's going to our website and checking out what the hours are going to be for this election. I think our office recommendation would be that we retain these hours, and even if the Wednesday evenings for the whole primary period might not be necessary, I think just for consistency and to see how that plays out in a primary, I think that would be good to just continue that. It really was popular, though. I think in a general, it might be worth considering doing an additional day, additional evening for a general. I don't think for a primary you need that, but that's certainly something the board can consider as we get closer to the general election, and as you all are looking at that over the summer.
Historically, has Wednesday been the most popular day? Is that why its hours are longer?
I think we just thought it was in the middle of the week.
Middle of the week, it's usually not the busiest day, but it was during the final, or during the
Yeah.
presidential election, yeah.
Those 2 hours made it the busiest weekday easily,
Yeah.
because those hours were popular. Friday is, I think, usually more, Thursday and Friday are usually the more popular days of the weekdays. But I think with the idea was that with the weekend being so close, there being weekend opportunities to vote so close to Thursday and Friday anyway. Friday is probably a harder day to get officers, and Friday you're competing with people's, entertainment. So I think Wednesday was a good sort of middle of the week, farthest away from the weekends, and was sort of a set night. So.
You recommend keeping that then?
Yeah, I would. Unfortunately, Wednesday doesn't lend itself to any great rhymes with late night or anything like that. But it's a day we did this past election. People used it, so some people will start to know it. And I think keeping some consistency of the hours from election to election helps to build habits. And certainly, since this is a new ordinance that went in place in November, I think keeping some consistency for a couple elections to allow us time to get data and then see what the trends are after we have a couple elections under the belt of this new ordinance would be useful. So
what's the date of the Sunday? Which Sunday are we talking about?
June 8th, I think. Yes. So the Saturday, we normally do the Sunday that's like 2 weeks and a couple days before Election Day in the generals, but there's no real opportunity for that here because you'd have to open all the satellites up for a day and then they'd be closed and then reopen them on that Sunday. So it's a little bit more pressure on staff at the end, but it's a lot less pressure on staff throughout the whole early voting process here because we're not managing 3 different sites. It's just all at the office until that last week or so.
And what's the date when the other satellite offices would all open?
It would be the 7th, June
June
7th. So we'd open at the office on May 2nd, and then June 7th is when all the satellites would open, and they'd be open all of those days. So it would be,
How many satellite locations?
it's 5 in total. So, and the office remains open during that time as well. So the 6 sites around the county that would be open for that last week would be the Haymarket Library, the Brentsville Historic Courthouse, and the office, and then the DMV for the Ferlazzo Building and the Dumfries Community Center. So, and those are all stipulated in the ordinance. That the previous ordinance changed the location based on the kind of election. So the new ordinance makes that consistent where whether it's a primary, a special, or a general, those are the locations that are open once the satellite locations open up.
What date do the satellite? What dates do the satellites open?
The June 7th through the
Okay, so it's
June
just-
7th
it's just
through the
that
June
last
14th,
week
that
where
last
all
week
6 are open. Okay.
for a primary, because we just really don't get, primary elections are, I think our projections are what, around 15%, or, they're really different from a general election. You you have 10 to 15% turnouts in a lot of them. If you have single party primaries, in the past when we had that, sometimes we'd have single digit, participation. So there's just a lot of voters that don't participate in the primaries, although I'm sure the people on your central committees and your party meetings are among those 15% who make sure to make it out for all of those primaries.
Did you get much feedback from supervisors or others about, so last year was the first year we opened only the office at the beginning of the 45 days, and the satellites didn't open until, the end of the process. And here it's going to be basically only, a week and a half or so.
Yeah.
Did you get, I know there are some specific voters who said, well, I don't want to drive all the way out to Manassas. Why can't I vote at the DMV, when everything else is going on?
I think there were, at the very start of the process, we had a couple supervisors get in touch with us. We had some complaints from not a ton of voters, but a significant number of voters, that said that they thought the other satellites should be open, and or that there should be something in the eastern part of the county. And I guess that considers, I think of us as being kind of in the middle of the county here, but I think there's a number of voters who kind of consider, like, probably once you get past Hoadley and sort of the Lake Ridge, Dale City, Woodbridge, Dumfries area in general, that's outside the Western County. And there are more satellites concentrated in that area because it's a denser population area. So you do have in that corridor, near 95, there's a lot more sites there because there's just a lot more voters in that area. The population, if you look at Prince William as a county, the population line where half the population is not in the middle of the county. It's towards the eastern part of the county. So we did tell voters now that that's a code thing, that the office has to be open for the entirety of the process. So I think when they were setting the satellite sites, it's when do we want those to open and where do we want them to open? And the idea being that if anyone really wants to vote really early, because we were open for the last 3 weeks at all the satellites, that they could either come up to the office or they could always request a mail ballot as an option. So, that could be something the supervisors could reconsider in the future and say, well, we'll open the DMV on the eastern side of the county, but I feel like if that argument happens, then somebody will say, Haymarket needs to be open, and we'll be back to where we were before. I know there were some proposals to, in the legislative session, to shorten the early voting period in general, mostly proposed by Republicans, mostly rejected by the Democratic-controlled legislature. I personally think those make sense just because we don't see a lot of voters voting in the first few weeks. So to me, it's just from an administrative level, it is a lot of wasted resources. And certainly if you have 3 or 4 or 2 weeks, that's a lot of time still to vote. And so I would like to see that in the future, that if the parties can come to some kind of compromise on what those days makes sense. It also, from an administrative standpoint, that 45-day mark, we have to open all our early voting sites and we have to mail out all of our mail ballots. And it is a real crush at that time. And if that happened in a more mail ballots go out, early voting opens up election day in a pattern that made a little more sense. And I think our ordinance was kind of in line with that, with, okay, we've seen the data. We know most voters are really going out in the last couple weeks anyway. So, but that is a state legislative decision ultimately. They can ask the registrars and boards for their input, and I know that VEBA and VRAV do have legislative committees that give their opinions and recommendations on those kind of things, but I think that ultimately lies with them, and it didn't seem like there was much appetite to change that in the immediate future. So
Any other questions, discussion? Do you have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to amend the office hours for the Office of Election from 8:30 to 4:30 on weekdays.
Second?
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
And, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to amend or to adopt the early voting hours in accordance with the General Registrar's proposal.
Second.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. So those are the hours.
Okay.
Last,
we will get
last-
to publishing those right away online, so the public has that information available.
All right. Last item is public comments. Do we have anybody that signed up for public comment? Or anybody who wants to make a public comment?
We don't have the list, but we could ask both of them.
All right. All right, so, Mr. Jeff Fuller, welcome.
Thank you, Board, Eric, lovely staff. I'm going to go through a couple things. Last time, Eric, you mentioned that there was another list of folks who were removed from the rolls for being non-citizen status. I would like the board to do an inventory or somehow make sure that you understand what happened to those people. Why did they get on the list? What was the adjudication that got them back into the rolls and so forth? It's a mystery to me. I've heard a couple different things from Eric over the time, and it's just not clear. So I just offer that as a suggestion. With regard to election officer vetting of the rolls, first, I congratulate you guys for doing that in 24 hours. It took me a lot longer than it took you, and I'm really grateful and actually pleasantly surprised at that result. The vetting of these people is not a science. It's definitely an art because we don't have great data on who, we know who voted, and we know who voted in primaries, but we don't know whether they were a Democrat voting in a Republican primary and so forth, so there's mystery. And I'm not giving that to you as an excuse, it's just a reality. Because Dina coached me last board meeting, I went back and reviewed our methodology for vetting, and we changed it to basically assume that anybody who applied to be a Republican should be a Republican, a Republican affiliated officer, unless we have good reason not to select them. Now, we had 89 cases that we couldn't find a voter ID, or where we found the voter ID, but it was the wrong name in the rolls. Now, these are our rolls. This is the stuff that we use at GOP, but it's based on Elect's data. It's also a month late, but I don't think those numbers would be explained by a month delay in the data. So I just note that for what it's worth. If you found data on those guys and corrected the voter ID so I could look them up, I would be happy to go back and have the committee review those. So there's 89 people we couldn't comment on or couldn't make a judgment on. I would be curious to know, maybe, I don't know if you've published this. I remember we had the old rule on election officers from a couple of years ago. What is the process if a voter is rejected by the party, objected to, and they don't like the result? I want to be able to have a discussion with them and let them know, or let me know what they're thinking. In other words, I'd be happy to reconsider, and in probably most cases, Jacob Alderman would agree. Let's take another look at that guy. So people might feel offended because they were rejected, and I understand that, but I would like to be able to make a soft landing if possible for that. Same thing with for objections and also for the people that you recommend. For people we recommend bringing in, I'd be curious to know what the process is for that. I strongly encourage pushing ballot tracks to help with the trust in the system. I'm sorry you mentioned Eric, but Keith, and for your benefit, Heidi, the commissioner wrote a letter and explained why she rejected Eric. There were some good reasons, and I certainly supported that. Anything you can do to get signage in the election precincts and maybe on the ballot or whatever that says, hey, don't vote if you're not a legal voter, would be welcome to me and to many of the Republican voters. The survey, congratulations on the results of the countywide survey. And I will say, my last time I did an election officer survey was in '23. It was an excellent survey. And I presume you guys get the results of that. I thought that was excellent, and it's obvious the registrar's office responds to those things. My final thought is, I don't think the Prince William County Board of Supervisors is providing adequate space to you guys. I think your warehouse is a cramped disaster compared to what I think an ideal office warehouse would be for the number of precincts you have. And you don't have a dedicated training facility, so it's like Camp Run-Amok, trying to find a way to adequately support the training needs. So I would urge the board to get with the Board of Supervisors and see if they can't come up with a way of adequately representing the importance of elections in Prince William County. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Anyone else? All right, that will close public comment period. So I believe we have some items for closed session. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Electoral Board go into closed session pursuant to Virginia State Code Section 2.2-3711-Alpha 3 for the purpose of discussing issues related to locality election security standards.
I second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we will go into closed session. Thank you all very much. Stay dry today.